Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Molten Music Technology. Today I'm looking at the Moog Mariana. Mariana is a bass synth, analog bass synth. It's absolutely fully and purposefully and intentionally analog in its very core, in its nature. I mean, obviously it's a software emulation, let's not get ahead of ourselves, but everything about this is embracing the idea that this is analog. It's pulling in all sorts of vibes from things like the Moog Taurus, the Model D, the Minitaur, the Sub Phatty, all those bottom end, fat, wide, low frequency synths that Moog do so well. And everything about this embraces the idea that it's about that bottom end, it's about that bass, it's about that stuff, those big waves that rattle our livers, that shake our bones and make us go, yeah, I might just start dancing. It's both very, very familiar to the point of actually being a little bit boring in its familiarity, because we've seen it kind of all before. Oh yeah, this is recognizable, I know this. Oh yeah, you know, usual things, oscillators, filters, envelopes, VCAs, that kind of thing. It's easy peasy to get into because you already know it. You can already use it. However, there's a depth to this, a level of detail that you don't normally see on this kind of software synth. There are fascinating amounts of modulation. There's odd things you can do in the routing and the way it goes. And not only is it a dual oscillator, sub oscillator, noise infused, multi-coloured, saturated animal of epic proportions, there's also two of them. Two stacked, one on top of the other, identical and yet independent and yet intertwined. There's a great deal to love about this synth, even if you feel you've been here before, even if you think you've got a dozen software synths that also do more or less the same thing, because there's no flashy wavetables, there's no digital control engine, there's no special sonic flips and twists or frequency modulation going on that'll take you to new and unexplored realms. No, this is very much explored, but it does it so well that it's a place that you're going to want to visit again and again. So is it superb? Yeah, it is. Is it the perfect synthesizer? No, it's not. It has plenty of room to actually fill out and improve. There's things in here that drive me a little bit nuts. But that's the nature of any synthesizer, is finding your way through it, is exploring every single crevice to see if you can find the pathway that works with your own workflow. And it definitely feels that Moog have done almost everything right. So in this video, I'll play a few presets, I'll bring you in, we'll initialize a patch, we'll look at how it all works, how it all hangs together, how the modulation works. We'll then do some filing around with the Mooga pedals, Mooga, I don't know, to show you how there's this fascinating way of routing modulation between Moog plugins. How does that work? I don't know. I will show you all of that, in the hope that you'll get a bit of a grasp as to what this fella can do. Comes with over 200 presets, which are in a decent browser, very easy to work your way through. Just to go through some random presets, just for fun really. You may notice there's no reverb involved in this. The effects engine is a little bit kind of odd, but there's no reverb, so this is all completely dry. Let's get to the nuts and bolts of the bassiness of this thing. So Mariana gives you a couple of different pages to look at. You've got two synthesizers, remember. So this is the front page for synth number 1, and on here you've got your dual oscillators, you've got mixer, you've got low pass filter, high pass filter, sub filter, voicing and noise. Then on the next page, the control page, you have the modulation. So you've got filter and amp envelopes which are hardwired in. You've got 3 LFOs, you've got a modulation envelope and 2 random sources. You've got the same for synth 2, exactly the same, identical. So you can use them separately or you can use them together. And then in the output page, you've got effects, you've got summing, you've got a little bit of mixing and panning, saturation and compression to hold the whole thing together. So let's look at the synth page to start with. So you have a dual oscillator. So you've got 2 oscillators knocking around like you do pretty much in every bass synthesizer. So you've got oscillator 1, which is holding the fort, which has got the main stuff going on. So in terms of waveforms then, you've got sine wave, triangle, then a shark tooth, which is quite nice, sawtooth, and square wave. It's a rum old looking square wave, I have to say. But it does feature the right sort of harmonics. You get this sort of idea. You've then got duty cycle here, which is nice because it provides not just pulse width modulation on the square wave, it also works on all the others as well. Oscillator 2 then follows along obediently. You've got a level here, so you can bring up the level for Oscillator 2, so they're now there together, but you've got this lovely detune possibility here. And you can actually detune a whole 7 semitones. Or a fifth. You can also do the same with the main oscillator. So you can either bring the first one down or detune the second one off it. It's entirely up to you. You can also hard sync it. You can also throw the second oscillator up 1 or 2 octaves and add some glide. Also, if you wish, you can throw the second oscillator out of phase. Doesn't sound that exciting. Let's put everything else back to normal. There you go. So within this dual oscillator little section, you've got the possibility of just beefing up the sound by having the waveforms on top of each other. You can detune to get your wobble and your beating going on. You can push the cycle around to give you that pulse width modulation sort of sound. You can shift the phase. I mean, there's so much potential for gooiness and change and that slight dissonance as oscillators fight against one another that it's completely brilliant. Or you can set things apart, create little dyads, little dual pitches knocking about the place, and all of that while mixing the level here in the mixer. I mean, Moog says anything above 7 adds a little bit of overdrive, which I suppose it does. But at every turn, on every knob, there's an opportunity just to make it go slightly off. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, right, so how do I modulate that? We'll come to that in a minute. Let's just have a look at more of this synth front panel. In addition to the dual oscillator, you've got a sub oscillator. It's subtle to some degree. Let's put everything back to where it should be. The sub oscillator has 3 wave shapes. If we listen to this by itself for the minute, you've got sawtooth, square, proper square this time, feels much more squarey. and a very pure sine wave that you can hardly hear at lower levels. It's there moving the blood in your body, and you don't even notice it until you do. You've also got some phase control over there, and you can set it to be 1 octave below or 2 octaves below, and you can also link it or unlink it. So what does that mean? Let's bring up our oscillators. If I have it linked, it means as I move the frequency of the first oscillator, it follows it. But if I don't, if I have it unlinked, is actually independent of that frequency, so you can theoretically set up a chord of 3 notes. Yeah, that's lovely. I know you're appreciating that a lot. And finally, you've got noise. You've got all sorts of colours. You've got red, pink, white, blue and purple. Which essentially means in the noise engine you've got a filter. You've either got all the low frequencies with red, comes into all of the frequencies with white, and then goes into the higher frequencies at purple. And sort of sweeps across that lot, which could get interesting. I don't know. Over here we also have a voicing section where you can change the legato mode, whether it's truly legato or re-triggering. So I put it onto legato, for instance. Or re-triggering. Get it? Yeah? And also in here we have the dual oscillator spread. So you can have something playing and then you can push the oscillators away into the stereo field. What I love about this at the moment is that there's so much scope just playing with the oscillators. Yeah, we haven't touched the filter yet. I mean, the filter is where everything happens. Isn't that where normally everything happens? We usually spend all our time on the cutoff knob. But so far, just playing with those 2 oscillators is such a lovely space. It's a lovely thing. You can introduce so much movement and gooiness and interactive, intertwined waveforms that are just filling the space with their gorgeousness. So we should probably look at the filters then. Okay, filters. Low pass, high pass filter, both Moog resonant filters. You've got a little bit of routing and ordering you can do. You can either have them serial, so one after the other. You can have them in parallel, or you can have them where the noise goes to the high and the oscillators go to the low. The sub is actually not involved in this. It has its own filter, which kind of turns it into a little synth all by itself. But let's get some of this going and have a little play. High pass filter. Or put them parallel. So parallel, they go through both and then they're added together afterwards. And then high pass noise is just the noise in the high pass. Now the resonance starts to fall apart at about 8, but you've got room in here to push it towards that place of, you know, self-oscillation and feedback. So you can tickle it, you can play with it before letting it go away. Woo. Now if you take everything else out, it will all play by itself. You can even map it more or less to 1 volt per octave if I apply some modulation, which I wasn't going to do at this point, but I'm going to do it. If I add some keyboard tracking to it, so we bring the sub back in and we use the filter. See, the sub is unconcerned. Which is either a good thing or a bad thing. Depends on how you look at it. So I can take the oscillators out, you know, almost completely, and then the sub is there all by itself. But of course, it has its own filter. Now you've got multi-mode, you've got high band or low. But if I take out the other oscillators, the sub-oscillator becomes this little synth all by itself. It's not quite so fierce. The filter doesn't quite have the ambition, I think, of the main low-pass filter. But it's really nice. There's one more factor here under the filter, which is the Oscillator Crossover. It sort of jams a filter between the dual oscillators and the sub. So if I go one way, it takes out one, and the other way, it takes out the other. So that's purely sub. That's purely oscillators. And it's interesting because what it does when it's sort of in the middle is that it creates this separation. So it feels now very much that the sub and the dual oscillators are kind of operating by themselves. Whereas I take that out and it fills out again, so they're much more net and meaty and entwined into each other. Whereas that pushes them apart. To add the spread in there as well. So that is the main synth. That's the guts of it. And there's two of these. There's a whole other one, synth number 2. It's exactly the same deal, same thing. You can just have a completely different thing going on and then have the two run side by side. So on the control page is where we find the modulation. 3 LFOs, 5 wave shapes, phase, settings, sync, not synced, keyboard reset on every note. Rate goes up to about 50 Hz, so it's not really looking at audio rate. You're not really looking to do frequency modulation synthesis within this as such, although you can to some degree through doing a little bit of shifting of scaling and offsetting. It is possible to get into that kind of territory, but I don't think that's what this is all about. You've got regular ADSRs for the filter and the amp, and those are exactly as you expect them to be. The modulation envelope also gives you up to 2 seconds of delay and up to 2 seconds of hold within itself. So that's fun. And then you've got 2 randomization generators, which can either again be synced or have their own free running rate. And that's based on sample and hold. It's also got a noise thing, and then it's got this purling noise. I have no idea what any of those things are, but hey, it generates a random what's it. So let's pipe some of that into our synth just to see how that works. Now if you're using a mouse, you can use a right click and that will instantly take you to the modulation of the knob that you've clicked upon. I don't have that right here right now, so I'm having to open it manually, but you'll find that it's the M at the side here. This panel comes in, this all just smooths down a bit. You select what it is you want to modulate, and there's your list. Now you can go for global. You've got velocity, keyboard tracking, mod wheel, pressure, MPE as well, that supports weird dimensions in an MPE controller, or you just pipe in any of the controllers you want, LFO1, whatever you like. The interesting thing is that you can also pipe in all of the ones from controllers 2. So even though there's a synth page and a control page 1 and a synth page and control page 2, it doesn't care. It is agnostic in terms of modulation. The only thing that's sort of hardwired is that filter and amp envelope. Otherwise, everything is open for whatever you want to route it to. So you don't have to route control page 2 to synth 2. You can mix and match. At the bottom here, you've got all this CV stuff, which is odd, but also exciting. We'll come on to that in a little bit. But first, let's just have a look at some regular modulation stuff. Well, first of all, as you already know, the envelope is already attached to the filter and the amplifier. So if we go to here, you can already get into that. But you can also allocate those if you want, because they are also available. So if I just go for something obvious like the cutoff, you've got the filter envelope, and mod envelope available there as well. But let's just go for a regular LFO. We'll throw that in. It gives us this panel that comes up where you can enable it, disable it. You can make it bipolar, so it goes for the full whack, and then you can set an amount. Now in this bit I can't set the speed. To set the speed, the rate, I have to go back to the control page and set that there, and then go back to my knob to go back to this panel. Now the interesting thing is here that once you've set your standard bits, your LFO bits, there's this other stuff underneath. You can choose another controller, say the filter envelope, and then the envelope will apply itself to the size of the LFO. So you've now got a modulator modulating the modulator. But that's not all. You've also got a function generator at the bottom which allows you to scale, offset, range the modulation, slew it, sample and hold it, and all sorts of bits and pieces. So I can scale it down, or scale it up. And of course I can add as many things as I like. Just to go back to the random for a moment, you can make that slewed so it gently moves from one thing to another, or have it stepped. This noise thing, or this purling noise, which is also a sort of a smooth form of randomization. Or have it on the very familiar sample and hold. Any modulation you add appears as a coloured ring around the knob, so you can always see exactly how much modulation is being applied and where it's being applied to, where it's moving. You've got this thing rattling around showing you exactly what's going on, which is brilliant. I always appreciate visual or visualize modulation within a software synthesizer. I think it's absolutely brilliant. The one thing that annoys the heck out of me is this here. See this? That looks every bit like a knob, doesn't it? You'd think, oh, that's showing me the amount of that modulator is affecting that knob, yeah? I think we can understand that. So I think, oh, I know, I'll change that. And you can't. It doesn't. All that does is open up this other panel where I can then adjust the amount, and you can see that change. But it seems to me like I'm having to do more work than I really need to. If this little knob here was just the amount, and I could just tap on it and move it all by itself, that would save me a whole other couple of clicks. But it's not. Well, you know, it's just giving us an indication of that amount. It's similar that there's not, within here, you don't have the rate for the modulator. But then, you know, I guess you've got to decide on where all of these controls are going to be. If the rate's here, well then do you need the ADSR knobs of the envelope? So they need to be here also. It's just that you're going to and from a couple of different pages and then coming back to the modulation thing. There's a little bit of, it's asking you just to do that little bit of work, and I don't always think that's completely necessary. It could be designed to make that a little bit more fluid. One thing I will say at this point is that it's really difficult to see where the knobs are. I mean, from the distance I am at the moment, which is a little bit stood back so that the cameras can work, it's really hard to see exactly where that tiny white dot is. I mean, I can see it, but it's not that easy. I can see it better when it's moving. In fact, there, because of there's this sort of fake reflection, it almost completely disappears. However, there is something you can do about that. You can go into the configuration and you can go knob position highlight. So it's as if Moog are saying, yeah, we know that the knobs are a bit crap. You can't see them. So here's an option so that you can see them. So now you've got these nice big white lines on there. It just doesn't look as nice. It ruins the whole vintage vibe of the thing. But at least now I can see what it's pointing at. But, you know, kind of to judge it, does it look good? Do I want functionality over aesthetic? What do I want? It puts me in this position where I have to think artistically and technologically as to whether my workflow is more important than my artistic expression, and you know, I don't really want to be making those sorts of decisions. I'd much rather that the thing was just perhaps slightly more visible. I mean, it is to look at very, very dull. You know, it just is. It's the same color palette. It's black on grey on grey on black with a little bit of silver. There's an occasional yellow button, but otherwise it's dull as anything, dull as dishwater. I mean, perhaps there would be some potential down the line of them going, oh, you know, we did that grandmother and the matriarch with the crazy colours. Why don't we do that here? And that way you could better see all of the different sections, and maybe there would be a better background against what the knob is pointing to, so you can better pick that out. Possibly. I'm just suggesting that might be one way you can go. So while I'm having a little bit of a moan, the other thing that's not quite perfect is the MIDI mapping. So you can map to a knob. Of course you can. This is MIDI. No problem. But where do you do that? Because over here you've got the modulation, that's fine. Over here, in fact, you've got a modulation summary which tells you all the sources and destinations and what they're connected to. Excellent. We like that. That's useful. How do I learn a knob? I mean, often you right-click and learn a knob, or there's a learn knob type button. But there isn't. If you right-click, it takes you to the modulation, which seems to be what Moog considers to be more important. So actual mapping, you have to go into the settings. And then you have to go down to MIDI control, map MIDI down here. There's a few nice bits and pieces and extras and configurations that you can do, but ultimately you go to map MIDI down here, and then you've got what looks more like a familiar MIDI learn space. Yes, so then you click on your thing and you turn the knob and it picks it up, and bam, you're there. So, you know, am I being overly fussy? Yeah, maybe. It just feels that it's a little bit hidden away. It could just be there, because I think it's the sort of thing you're going to do a lot. And it's a lot of tapping here, tapping there, open this thing, to get to something as simple and obvious and everyday as mapping a control to a knob. That could be up here. Could be, I think. However, on the other hand, one thing that is rather great is that you can save the mapping with the preset, which means each preset can have different mapping. Now that will trip you up to start with, because you'll map all your controls, go to another preset, and it's all gone. And you'll go, what the jabberwock? And you have to do it all again. So there's a button here, load from preset, which you need to take off in order to make sure that your mapping stays as you go through different presets. Unless, of course, you want to save the mapping for different presets, which is actually a very powerful feature. Right, the last page is the output page. This is where we get to mix our two synthesizers together. You've done all your waveform mixing in the synth itself, in synth 1, in synth 2. So that's all fine, that's all good. What you want to do now is mix the two together. Now, of course, I haven't been using 2. So what am I going to do about that? Oh, I know. There's a function here where you can copy synth 1 to synth 2. Why don't I do that? Copy synth 1 to synth 2. So I've now got two synths exactly the same on 1 and 2 layered up. I love the way that they're playing with each other because there's so much sort of grit and instability. I don't mean there's chaos. I mean the vibe you're getting from these oscillators, the way that this has been emulated, the amount of analog variation that's knocking around in here means that you're putting these two identical synths together with identical patches and they are moving and shifting against each other. This is not a synth where you need a vintage knob. You're not trying to dial in an amount of awfulness. It's built in, it's baked in at its core that it is deliciously awful. I know what I mean by that, you know, even if you don't. See, it's interesting how it's also carried across the mapping. So I'm now controlling synth 2, cut off, and synth 1, so they're working together. I wasn't sure that would happen because there's this other thing with the filters in that sometimes when you're using the sub filter and low pass filter together, it would be nice if they were tied somehow. If there was a button to not use the sub through its own filter but to route the sub through everything else, or somehow tie them together so they're always going to be used and operating in the same vibe. Do you know what I mean? But there doesn't appear to be a way to do that other than mapping a MIDI knob to the same control. Let's make this as synth 1. Let's stick that up higher. Let's go to synth 2. Put that down a bit lower. Okay, back to the output thing. You've got synth 1 and synth 2. This is slightly odd. You have a delay effect on synth 1 and a chorus effect on synth 2. They're not interchangeable. You can't run synth 1 through the chorus. You can't run synth 2 through the delay. They are individual to each synth. Why? Why is this? Why is it? What possible? I mean, what possible reason could there be for that? Why can't they be effects that you route either 1 to or send to? I mean, there's probably like a historic, proper nerdy synth reason why there's a delay on number 1. And not on synth 2. For synth 2 I get a chorus. Which is nice. Both of them are nice. Don't get me wrong, they're very nice. It's such a huge sound, I just can't quite believe it. And there is, as I say, no reverb or anything else like that. However, there's other stuff. I mean, this is already a big sound. Maybe it's I don't know. We're just going to go with it. What you have is saturation. So you've got tube, tape, and drive. I'm going to take out synth 2 for the moment. So that's tube. tape. I can't quite see where my finger is. And then drive. I mean, it's flipping excellent. And even if you just go up to about 2, it's already piling on the gorgeousness. Let's bring in synth 2 again. You can also pan, if you like, and you've got level control. And overall level. And then the final stage at the end is a compressor. Which you can kind of use to pull everything together. If you feel you've lost something in that compression, you can pump in the FET compressor, which kind of creates this feedback into the compressor level. This is just, oh, it's fun all the way. Moog Mariana. Yeah, that's one meaty synth, that is. Just before moving away and looking at the CV modulation, we've got this little keyboard down here, which is essentially doing exactly what you imagine it does. However, you do have a certain something going on, which is the length or the height of each note can affect things differently. And I think it's attached to pressure. Pretty sure it is. If I go to something that's going to be helpful, let's do that one. Pressure. Yeah. So essentially you can hit a key and you can move forward in order to apply modulation via the pressure source. You can also scale these in different ways, add and remove notes. You've got this correction thing here, which is essentially a quantize. So with it off, I can just slide and the pitch will climb with it on. It steps. That's it. This is such a brilliant patch. I really should save it somehow. I wonder how I do that. Let's go. Save preset as Molten. Awesome. So the last thing to talk about is the CV plugin internal underground tunneling that you get between different Moog plugins. Now this was introduced first of all in the Moog Fuga plugins, where they could talk and modulate each other just like the hardware could. Now with the Mariana, that also has that facility, so that you can modulate the pedals from Mariana or Mariana from the pedals. Let's see if I can show you how that works. So I've got Mariana here. So let's load a delay, Moog Fuga delay, like so. If I click on CV here, it allows me to set what I want to send and receive. So it's almost as if these two have networked themselves up. You know, this creates itself a name, this creates itself a unique name, and they can see each other and then share CV between them. So I'm going to want the LFO in here to modulate this, and then I'm going to want, I don't know, an LFO from here or something to modulate that. That sounds like a plan. So if I look under CV voltage in, scroll down, there it is at the bottom, LFO. So this LFO has now appeared here. There's a little glowy plug. Let's go the other way. So I'm going to take let's take the envelope filter for fun, going out the other side. So how we view that then is by, if I right click my cutoff here to open up the modulation, because I'm now using a mouse because that seems to be easier at this point. I'm going to go all the way down the bottom here to CV1, turn that on, make it bipolar, I think. Maybe bring it down a little bit. And now this is matched to this LFO. In fact, it's this LFO here. As I turn that up, you see that speeds up and slows down. So going the other way, on the Moog Fuga, I click on CV and then click on, say, time, and it brings up a menu down the bottom here. There's my filter coming, there's my envelope coming from the Mariana. So let's see if we can hear a little bit of this. So you have this interoperability between these different Moog plugins, which is extraordinary. I mean, everything should have this. Why doesn't anything else have this? I don't know of anything else that does this. I mean, it's a little bit like Rewire, I suppose, but the ability to intermodulate between different plugins is just completely awesome. It should absolutely be the standard. Everyone should be doing this. I mean, it'd be great to have, a Native Instruments synth be able to send out the modulation that's something you've created in there to modulate something within something else. Or to be able to double up on modulators with a synth to play with different effects. It opens up a whole world of things. And if Moog are going to continue to do this with more and more releases, it's going to be quite an extraordinary little ecosystem. So I would love to see that in more synths. That's enough, I think. I think that's given you a flavour, a dive, a fiddle about within what Mariana can do. It's pretty extraordinary. The hugeness, the epicness of the sounds that can come out of it are just quite amazing. I mean, there's 200 odd presets in there. All of them are pretty brilliant and give you a really great flavour of what it's capable of. You've got some duophonic stuff. You can create chords. But of course, you've got the bounce and fierceness of all of those Moog synths that have been pulled in together and crushed into this one machine. As I said at the start, it's not doing anything particularly new. You've probably got similar sort of sounds and similar capabilities in all sorts of different software synths. But what really pleases me is the fierce dedication to keeping this as analog as possible, to giving you quite an extraordinary amount of modulation and control behind the scenes, but every sound, every waveform is being generated in the fullest, juiciest electrical fashion possible. And it shows, it shows in the limitations of what you can do, in how the LFOs only go so far, in how you can't necessarily connect everything together that you wanted to. There are modulators, there are sources, and there are destinations. It's not everything. In fact, you can't actually modulate the wave shape, which is a little bit of a shame. You can change the duty cycle, but you can't swap between waveforms, which is, I think, quite a nice thing, quite an interesting thing to be able to do within a synthesizer, but you can't do that. So there are limitations, but all the time you're thinking down the lines of what could actually be done in hardware, as opposed to inventing blue sky thinking over what could be done in software. And that's what keeps this real, I think. It feels so authentic. It feels like you really are working with a piece of hardware, and that's a great thing to pull off, I think. And Moog are the perfect people to do that. But it's the detail, it's the amount of stuff you can do purely in the oscillations, whether it's spreading the voices about, whether it's messing about with the duty cycle, whether it's phasing, whether it's detuning, whether it's offsetting to generate chords, and then it's the modulation, whether the modulator is being modulated by a function or another modulator. The room in here to craft different journeys for all sorts of different parts of the synth is immense. But also, at the starting level, like when I initialized the patch and just got started with that, you've got fabulous fat waveforms that do exactly what you imagine they should be doing, with a filter that sounds exactly like it's supposed to and behaves exactly like it's supposed to. So that familiarity really works, as opposed to making it boring, as opposed to making you think, yeah, whatever. That sense of nostalgia, that connection you have with it because you already know how it works, just removes all of the barriers so that you can play and start crafting sounds and just enjoy the enormousness of the interplay between two whole synthesizers running their dual oscillators and then two sub-oscillators, piling itself into saturation, into a compressor, and out to the enjoyment of your ears. I wish it was a bit more colourful. I wish you could see what the knobs were doing a little bit more. The other thing that annoys me is when you play, you have no idea what it is that's playing. By which I mean there's no indication. There's no indication that MIDI's going in, for instance. There's no MIDI LED light. There's no indication if synth 1 is playing or synth 2 is playing. There's great visualization on the modulation. That is brilliant. I love that. But I don't know, is synth 1 playing or synth 2 playing? How would I know? And so you spend a lot of time perhaps fiddling with the filter on one synth when it's actually the other one that you're hearing because it's muted. But you see that in the output. So if you go to the output page, there I can see what is happening. But I'm not going to be in that page very much because I want to be fiddling with the synth. So you have these two mute buttons, and often, synth 2 is muted, but I could be in synth 2 and I've got no idea that that's muted. And I could be playing with that filter going, I don't understand why it's not making a sound. Well, because that one's muted. So perhaps, here's an idea, could those mute buttons be duplicated up on the toolbar? Next to synth 1, next to synth 2, just to show me which ones are active. Another thing could be you could have little VU meters up there or an LED to show you that you're getting an output from each one. Synth 1 here could flash green, this could flash green or flash red. Do you see what I'm saying? In that it would just be helpful to have a better indication of what it is that's actually going on. But that's probably my only real gripe, and these are mere trifles compared to the awesome power of this synthesizer. So that was the Moog Mariana. I hope that was helpful, and in the meantime, go and make some tunes.